About you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country and indeed across the world. We have plenty coming up. We will be talking about the intriguing developments in Ukraine, why an under-fire Prime Minister went to India to talk trade, and I'll be talking to two former top political insiders, one who used to work for the leader of the Liberal Democrats and one who helped run Conservative Central Office at the time of John Major. They're both sitting with me here in the studio. Lots of other people joining in those conversations as well, so don't go away. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Bethany Elsey.
Thanks, Alistair. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is just the beginning and that Moscow has plans to invade other countries. Journalist and chief editor at Ukraine World, Volodymyr Yermolenko, told GB News NATO countries should prepare for further attacks.
I think the West should understand that this is a big second front, because Ukrainians are fighting on the ground. They are dying for their country, but also for Europe. And it's clear right now that if Ukraine falls, Russia will continue its expansion to the NATO countries.
Meanwhile, the governor of Luhansk says shelling in all Ukrainian-controlled cities in the eastern region is intensifying. UK military intelligence says Russian forces have made no major gains in the last 24 hours, and heavy fighting continues in Mariupol, frustrating Russian attempts to capture the city. New satellite images appear to show further mass graves east of the port city. Ukraine says thousands of people have died in Mariupol after 2 months of shelling. In other news, Boris Johnson has been warned his party will be punished at the ballot box over Partygate as the threat of more police fines hangs over him. Conservative MP Steve Baker told the Daily Telegraph his constituents are furious over lockdown breaches in Downing Street, and it could hurt the Tories at the local elections on the 5th of May. Number 10 has said the Prime Minister hasn't been fined for a Bring Your Own Bottle garden party in May 2020. It's reported several fines have been issued to people who attended that event. UK supermarkets have placed limits on how much cooking oil people can buy due to supply chain problems caused by the war in Ukraine. Tesco has introduced a temporary buying limit of 3 cooking oils per customer, and Iceland is rationing sunflower oil sales to 1 bottle per person. Most of the UK's sunflower oil comes from Ukraine. The British Retail Consortium said the move was a temporary measure to ensure availability for everyone. National statistics show the price of cooking oils and fats is nearly a quarter more expensive than a year ago. And campaigning has ended in the French presidential elections ahead of polls opening tomorrow. Pollsters are predicting the race for presidency is very close, with Emmanuel Macron expected to reach just over half of votes, between 55.5% and 57.5%. Voter turnout, though, is expected to be under 75%. That's the lowest since 1969. Well, our reporter Paul Hawkins is in Paris with us. Paul, what's the mood there?
Yeah, well, to give you an idea of why voter turnout is so low, in the past 5 minutes, we've just spoken to a couple of people. One lady said to us that she was intending to spoil her ballot because she didn't want to choose between Emmanuel Macron or Marine Le Pen. Neither candidate appealed to her, so that kind of gives you an idea about how the French are feeling in that one voter. Another lady said that she will vote reluctantly for Macron, but she didn't find him particularly convincing in the recent debate, especially when he was talking about his economic policies. She felt that he was too capitalist, and so that gives you an idea about how the French are feeling. He has alienated a lot of the left-wing vote in France because of his right-wing economic policies, and that is why voter turnout is expected to be particularly low when the French go to the polls tomorrow.
That's very interesting. Paul Hawkins joining us from Paris. Thanks very much for that update. Now, drugs for an overactive bladder could be made available over the counter for the first time. The government is calling on millions of women with the condition to take part in a consultation period. It could lead to the medicine Aquiet, used to treat women with milder symptoms, being reclassified so it can be bought at a pharmacy without a prescription. Safe standing areas in football has improved crowd safety. That's according to a government pilot scheme. It found the installation of rails led to more orderly goal celebrations and fan exits and made overcrowding easier to spot. Clubs have been required to have all-seated stadiums for 25 years in the wake of the Hillsborough disaster. And happy birthday, Prince Louis. Buckingham Palace has released 4 photos to mark the youngster's 4th birthday today. The pictures taken by his mother, the Duchess of Cambridge, show him playing barefoot in the Norfolk sand dunes. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. Let's get back to Alistair.
Bethany, thank you very much indeed. Coming up this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends, as Boris Johnson faces even more threats to his leadership, rows over the Partygate scandal continue. Pressure is mounting for the Prime Minister. We will be looking at what it means for his fight back. And as things unfolded at home, he, of course, flew to India in an attempt to strike a trade deal. We'll look at that too with people that are really in the know. Plus, Russia resets its ambitions in Ukraine. Victory, not only in the Donbass, but the whole of the south. It's also opened a humanitarian corridor a couple of hours ago. We'll be keeping an eye on that and see how well it goes. It hasn't done frightfully well in the past, but the intention is to allow civilians to leave the devastated area of Mariupol today, as activity from Russia increased overnight. We'll be looking at that and discussing the UK's offering of tanks to Ukraine via Poland. And as you just saw in the news bulletin, just across the channel in France, it is the day of rest before the public cast their vote in this year's presidential election, or tear them up, as somebody told Paul. We'll be discussing that. The latest opinion polls do indeed show Emmanuel Macron on track to win, but just. Le Pen's far-right party has never been this close to power. We'll be crossing live to France to get all of the details. And as always, we genuinely want to hear from you. Email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk. We're also on Twitter and Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. So, as Russia resets its ambitions in the Ukraine, victory not only in the Donbass but across the whole of the south, it's also set to permit a humanitarian corridor for civilians to escape from Mariupol. Further down the road, it's becoming increasingly clear that Putin's ambient show ambitions extend beyond the south of Ukraine, but as far west as those parts of Moldova, already loyal to Russia. And the UK says it will offer top-range tanks to Ukraine, but via Poland. They get the British battle tanks so that they can give their tanks on to Ukraine. But how dangerous is that? We'll be exploring what it all means with folk who know. Plus, as the papers suggest, another Partygate fine is winging its way to the Prime Minister's inbox. We'll explore what it all means for Boris Johnson's fight back. Under pressure at home, of course, he flew to India to talk trade and a little bit about Ukraine. Is he playing a blinder or beginning to lose his gift for seizing on any situation and acting accordingly? I have sitting here live with me in the studio two former top aides to former party leaders, plus one of the experts on the impossible office of Prime Minister. And that is a dear friend of mine, Anthony Selden. Also joining us, a dear friend of mine who I worked with at Channel 4 News and who then went on to the BBC, one of the finest diplomatic correspondents of his era, Nick Gowing, is here live as well. We'll take a peek at the French election on what is a day of rest for the French voters before they face the ballot box on Sunday. Now, let me repeat it once more, because it does matter. We want to hear your thoughts on all of that and anything else via the usual routes. GBViews at gbnews.uk, Twitter and Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And thank you very much indeed, Peter, for getting the ball underway. People are sick about hearing about parties. We don't have an opposition with policies, just a preoccupation with cake. Labour appears bereft of ideas but full of hypocrisy. Well, there's a start. As I said, joining me live in the studio are Joe Phillips, Joe's former spin doctor to the Lib Dem leader, Paddy Ashdown, and sitting right next to me is Joanne Nadler. She worked in central office of the Conservative Party when John Major was Prime Minister. Both of the men that you served, as it were, you directly as spin doctor to Paddy, but also you at central office when John was facing those difficulties, they had torrid times as well. But we've been around a wee while, all three of us. Have you ever seen anything quite as bad as this?
It's appalling, and so much of it is of Boris Johnson's own making, and the Downing Street operation, which is so dire, Alistair. I mean, as you say, we've all seen it before. John Major had his problems, Paddy had his problems, although actually, you know, that did see his ratings soar in some areas because it got us coverage. We were always fighting to get in the papers, and we certainly did on Paddy Pantsdown. But I think this is just so appalling, and what Peter or Paul, I forget his name, who did.
It was Peter.
You know, I can understand people think this is trivial, but it's not. It's about the office and it's about democracy. And we're looking and we see right before our very eyes what happens when you don't have democracy. Sure. You have Putin.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think if you have a parliamentary democracy that is not accountable, where the governing party think the rules don't apply for them and will try and cover it up, it's not about the parties. It's about the crime, the laws that they created, that we all abided by. And Boris Johnson is dragging it out and looking like an idiot.
Joanne, let me pick up one thing that Joe just said there in the middle, and joking apart, Paddy Pantsdown affairs and what have you. I'm left with one abiding thought, and you and I have talked about this on several occasions in the past, that the public don't agree with you. They know Boris Johnson. As they said of Bill Clinton, we knew he was a bum, but he's our bum. And somehow or another, against everything that's thrown at him, he is surviving, he is fighting on, and the leader in the Daily Telegraph today says if he holds his nerve, he'll still be there to contest the next general election.
I think there's quite a high possibility that that could still happen. I think it's because of two things, really. I think it's because Boris Johnson himself, and yes, you're right, we have discussed this before, is something of a character on whom people project their particular hopes, aspirations, desires. And that works in a negative sense as well. I mean, he's a sort of cartoonish figure for the left and very easy to sort of dispel. So there's that, in the sense that he's always a moving target.
Yes.
And I think, regardless of what you might consider to be the morality of it, the fact that he has let this thing play out has actually been very clever strategically. And the other reason why I think it's still quite possible that he might lead the Conservatives at the time of the next election, however perilous that situation is is that there frankly is not an obvious person to take over for him. And that is why we're not seeing and hearing lots of Conservative MPs this week.
Joe's champing at the bit.
Well,
no, hang on a minute, because I will come in on that with Joanne saying there isn't an obvious candidate at the Tory. But I want to put another thing to you, which fits in perfectly with both of your analyses. And that is that Paddy Ashdown was, like Boris Johnson, a big character, ex-Special Boat Squadron, a kind of heroic figure and what have you. Boris Johnson's lucky with his enemies. Ed Davey, lovely man though he is no Paddy Ashdown, not even a David Steele.
I mean,
and bluntly, Sir Keir Starmer is no Tony Blair.
No, and I think that's a fair point. But I think that now Keir Starmer has found his feet. I think that he was really, really good in the House of Commons, and that rather dull, forensic, lawyerly manner that he's got. Actually, when you're talking about, well, I didn't know if it was a party, I didn't know if it, squirmy like a 9-year-old.
But if either of you, and I know you want to come back on there being no alternative, but I've got a fresh question for you on that, so we can carry that bit on going. But if either of you were advising Sir Keir Starmer, would you have said, the House comes back on Tuesday, Johnson will apologise again, attack him for that. Wednesday is Prime Minister's questions, attack him again for that. And then Thursday is the reference to the Privileges Committee, attack him again on that. The opposition looks like a one-trick pony.
Well, I think it was actually quite right strategically for this week, because if they hadn't kept going and going and going, they probably wouldn't have seen or created the embarrassing U-turn 13 minutes before the vote was due to take place, or the debate was due to start, on the privilege.
Yeah, that was all about the enemy within, though.
Yes, yes, it was.
They did the head count. There were parliamentary private secretaries who were going to resign, 6 of them, and the whips could not guarantee, even with a 70-plus seat majority, that the Prime Minister would be defended.
And that wouldn't have happened had the Labour Party and the opposition not kept going on it, because I think the fact that Keir Starmer had more or less said to Tory council candidates, if you vote to protect him, your face will be on the posters that go into the doorsteps. I mean, the big issue and the real issue, I think, which is probably what people do care about, is the cost of living.
Yeah.
But if you have somebody who is not taken seriously, and I hear what Joanne says about, yes, you build it in, you buy in the bluster and the buffoonery and the lies and the shenanigans, actually, people will not be able to afford to heat.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that a lot of the real grown-ups currently within the Conservative Party agree with you. Johnson's real vulnerability is a manifesto says that we won't increase taxes or national insurance, and does.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's absolutely right. But to pick up, Joe, on what you were saying about Keir Starmer and his lawyerly manner, I mean, I don't completely disagree with you about that. However, where I think Keir Starmer went quite wrong this week is to depart from his lawyerly manner and to enter into a sort of moralistic position where he was criticising the very personality, the very essence of Boris Johnson. And I don't think that suits him. I think that comes across as... And also, that makes him a hostage to fortune, because, as we well know...
His opening address in the reference to privileges debate was almost theological.
Yeah, there is no politician that doesn't have some kind of skeleton in their wardrobe. And frankly, coming from a man who leads a party that was, only so very recently referred to the EHRC because of accusations of anti-Semitism.
That was under Jeremy Corbyn.
It was, but he sat there...
Who he wanted to be Prime Minister.
He sat there...
And lead the country.
He campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn. So, frankly, to take this kind of moralistic tone, I think it's hugely hypocritical, and I think it's counterproductive for him. And I think it misses the target that he might be able to hit, which is if he sticks to this kind of, we know he's a lawyer, we know he's a barrister, we know he can make a case. So stick to what you're good at.
Can I take you both back to the enemy within? Because I rudely interrupted you when Joanne said something and you wanted to comment on her assertion that there wasn't an obvious successor. And my point is this to both of you, you first if you would, that the one thing that privileges debate and the moral high ground tone that Starmer adopted was that it wielded out a couple of other big players, and nobody can deny that Baker is not a big player. He's now changed sides within 48 hours.
Exactly.
And Tobias Ellwood, who would have us believe he's an heir apparent at some juncture, give your answer in a moment. You're off camera doing that. In that sense, that did matter because they're big figures.
Yes.
But not that many of them.
No, but Steve Baker's a good organiser. I mean, Steve Baker may not be a household name. He's known to us because we're political junkies. But he's got a full-page interview.
Big footprint on COVID.
The Telegraph.
Big footprint on getting rid of Theresa May.
Exactly. All of that. He helped organise the putsch that got rid of Theresa May, which I think if I was in Boris Johnson's shoes, I'd feel slightly anxious about because he got Boris Johnson elected and there's nothing so bad as an enemy within. I think just to go back on there's no obvious... Well, obviously, Rishi Sunak's done for, through his own making. But we have, on the one hand, people say, oh, we can't possibly get rid of Boris, you know, there's a war on. Well, there's Ben Wallace, who's way, way up in the polls amongst Tory members. Defence Secretary. There's Penny Mordaunt, who I think is coming on the show tomorrow.
I'm not saying there aren't potential people. I'm saying there's no obvious person.
But the point...
Let me draw those 2 points together. And you're absolutely right. Penny Mordaunt is on the show tomorrow, and thank you very much indeed for saying that. And I'm looking forward to it very much. She's just back from the States talking about trade again, getting the job done. But adding to Tobias Ellwood's name, it's fascinating, runners and riders, since Rishi fell out of the betting stakes. I know that's just Ladbrokes and William Hill, but it's where the money's going at the moment. Two of the most promising names are indeed Penny herself and Tom Tugendhat, who does on foreign affairs what Ellwood does on defence policy, chairs of select committees. I tell you what that says to me, and I'd love to hear what you, as much better experts than I think about it, is it says that the party is looking for a change in leadership, but not yet.
Well, I think that's probably true. I mean, it's always helpful.
And that means he'll face the electorate in 2024.
Well,
not necessarily.
No, I think what it says is that the party is looking for a serious thing, that they bought into Johnson, as Joanne said, because of the character, the larger than life and all the rest of it. I was here a few days ago, actually, and one of the people I was on with, his mum, who was sitting outside in the green room, is the chair of a local Conservative policy forum. And she said, I want to rip up my membership card, but I want to make a fuss about it because I'm so angry at Boris Johnson. I'm so angry that he doesn't take us seriously. And I think what the Tory party is doing is realising that actually we've got a cost of living crisis, we've got the war in Ukraine, we've got many, many, many big problems, we've got energy. Now we need somebody serious.
I mean, with respect, there will be as many members of the Conservative Party who would be ripping up their membership card if it junks Boris Johnson. That was my point.
Yes.
Is that, you know, he's somebody that has always created a sort of passionate response. In fact, I was relatively unusual as a Conservative for having my reservations about choosing him as a leader and then feeling actually my reservations were misplaced up until, quite frankly, the sort of catastrophic series of events that really started with the way Number 10 handled the Owen Paterson affair. And I think that has been very pivotal in the situation that we're in now. But I would still, say there are great strengths of Boris Johnson, and that is why we're not seeing a kind of a deluge now of people calling for his departure.
If the Tory party do badly in the local elections, and you know far better than me or Alistair how ruthless the party can be, they'll ditch him.
Do you think, on that, let me just add a thing, and I'd love to know your thoughts, because in your day, the Liberal Democrats and the Liberals, before they became the Liberal Democrats, were the absolute masters of by-elections. And we got Wakefield as well. Yeah. Even to the point of it being rumoured, he's now denied it, that Labour were knocking on Ed Bull's door saying, look, we need a bit more charisma on the front bench. Ed has now said, no, he's not interested in Wakefield. But it just strikes me, and there's an intriguing poll about the Red Wall seats in the Mail today, showing that support for the Tories behind the Red Wall is beginning to slip. That is quite significant.
And I think that's
but
the cost of living.
If the Tories lose Wakefield and it goes back to Labour where it was before, really badly, I suspect that's even more significant than the May 5th local elections.
I don't know. Because I think they'll write that off as a by-election blip. The sitting party always says, oh, it's a by-election.
But Sir John Curtis of Strathclyde University also makes the point that you can write May the 5th off to a degree as well, because what really matters on May the 5th politically is Northern Ireland. Sinn Féin might actually win. And secondly, it's only a third of the seats, generally speaking, and it compares a period 5 years ago when both Tory and Labour were in pretty torrid times. So it's not that clear a mirror image of where we really stand right now.
But it's quite a useful barometer, Alistair, because it's about the morale in the local party. And I think if you've got, all political parties are not full of bad people, as Joanne and I both know. Most people who go into politics go into it for the right reason. And at local level, they work extremely hard doing the boring, the unsexy stuff. If those people lose their seats because of what is perceived to have been going on in Downing Street, whether it's being out of touch with the cost of living crisis, which I think is the real problem.
Yes, I agree with that.
And the hike in national insurance, or whether it's Partygate, or whether it's they've just had enough.
I tell you what we're going to do. It's 23 minutes past 12. That was a brilliant start. Both of you, thank you very much indeed.
I thought that was a rehearsal.
No, the rehearsal was out in the green room when we were all having coffee. I'm going to ask you to come back at 1 o'clock, and at that point we'll also be joined by someone you both know, Nick Gowing, who I worked with at Channel 4 News way back when, and weave a little bit more of the foreign affairs agenda and going to India and Ukraine and the rest of it. So stretch your legs, have a little break, and then join me again if you'd be so kind at 1 o'clock. But for the time being, Joe Phillips and Joanne Nadler, thank you both very much indeed. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and truly brilliant friends. We've lots more coming up on today's programme. Today marks the remembrance of England's patron saint, St George. We will be crossing live to one of our reporters, Alice, who will be covering how people are celebrating everything English, from food to music. And that is next. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking mostly fine and sunny in the north, but cloudier with a few showers further south. Let's take a look at the details. A fair amount of cloud is likely across the southwest of England, so sunshine will be limited. 1 or 2 showers are also likely expected across Cornwall and West Devon. The southeast of England looks mainly dry, although here too soon the sun will move in and out of the cloud, and there'll be a cooling easterly wind blowing. Heading west into Wales, and this is where we'll likely see most of the sun this afternoon. 1 or 2 of them could be heavy showers. By contrast, the northwest of England can expect a fine afternoon with increasingly sunny skies. As elsewhere, although it will feel warm in the sun, and there'll also be a cooling wind. Much of the northeast of England will also be sunny, although patchy low cloud could affect North Sea coasts, and the onshore wind will make it feel chilly at times. The wind won't be as brisk across Scotland, and here lots of sunshine is likely. However, parts of the east coast and far north of the country will have low cloud and mist. A fine afternoon is on the cards for Northern Ireland. There'll be some cloud at times, although the sun will still pop through, lifting temperatures into the mid-teens. Sunshine will give way to clear spells in the evening. Southern England could see further showers with low cloud and mist further north, and that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It is exactly 28 minutes past 12 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. Today marks the remembrance of England's patron saint, St George's Day, also known as the Feast of St George. There are many celebrations taking place across the country today, with people commemorating everything brilliant about being English, from its history, its food and its music. Well, our GB News London reporter, Alice Porter, who's also an English thing well worth celebrating, is there live for us in Trafalgar Square, where people have been gathering all morning to enjoy performances, look around the great English markets. Alice, it's a real buzz down there, you're telling us.
It really is. I have to say, the main thing that I'm really smelling across the whole area here is fish and chips, because, of course, what is more English than a good plate of fish and chips? And everyone around me is eating it. We've had some Morris dancers behind me, but of course there's also lots of stalls that are doing lots to make us remember about the legend of St George. So there's a night training school that's just up there, which, you know, I might see how the afternoon pans out and have a go there. But there's lots of fascinating people who are joining me, including Nicola Marshall, who is a Pearly Queen from the Pearly Kings and Queens. Nicola, just explain the outfit and just explain this amazing tradition that I think some of our viewers just wouldn't know about.
Yeah, sure. The tradition dates back to 1875 with a young guy called Henry Croft. And he was lived in a workhouse, and he was a road sweeper and rat catcher when he left the workhouse, and he wanted to give back. If he was standing on a street corner in just a normal outfit, you wouldn't recognise him. Whereas if he was wearing all his buttons, he'd stand out, and that's how it started. And through the market traders who he befriended, he then got different Pearly family for the different boroughs of London. Obviously, the boroughs have changed over the years, so you've got different Pearly families in different areas and things like that. So,
and so you do some amazing fundraising. That's really sort of the history of it, by wearing these absolutely incredible outfits. And you've been born into, do we say, a King and Queen Pearl family? I mean, what is this?
Yes, that's right. So I've been doing it since I was about 6 months old. Did it through my grandparents, and it's been handed down through the generations. So I was always the princess when I was younger, and then when my nan was no longer able to do it, I took over as queen. So you're stuck with me now as the queen.
Okay, so maybe I could be a princess in training before I become a queen. And you've come to this event with your family and your friends, doing this every year. I mean, what is this like, sort of celebrating St George's Day? I mean, particularly, you guys are obviously such a stable of doing so much fundraising across London. I mean, it must be such a pleasure to come here every year.
Oh, it's wonderful, because we're an old London tradition, and St George's Day is very London, English, and Great Britain, really. So we're all multicultural and things like that. So yeah, it's a real honour to be asked to do it, and we always make sure that we've got the people available to do the job.
Now, I've seen they've got some of your, I suppose, your colleagues who are sort of behind you. I mean, we've all got the most amazing outfits, but just, I mean, how difficult is it getting all these beautiful buttons and pearls and getting them onto the outfits? I mean, they look absolutely amazing.
Yeah, we're always making a new outfit. As you can see, I've got a temporary jacket on at the moment because I'm in the middle of making another one, and the other one's worn out. So we're always making them on the go. The buttons, we can get donations, but we can purchase them abroad and things like that. But you'll see that there's different patterns on people's outfits, and they represent different parts of charity or things that we're interested in, or some of the old London traditions. Some families like to have a family pattern and things like that. So, and everybody has got their title on their back, so you can see where we're the Pearly King or Queen or Prince, Princess of.
Oh, can we see your bag?
Who gets it?
Oh, I love it. There we go. Well, what does it say? It's saying Pearly Queen, Welwyn. What is that? Welwyn City. There we go, and that's where you've come from today to do this. Well, listen, look, thank you so much for coming down. Thank you so much for speaking to us. And I think that gives you a hint there of so much wonderful history and culture that's really being celebrated here in Trafalgar Square. Of course, this event hasn't been able to take place over the last couple of years because of COVID, but I think it's very much back in full force.
Absolutely brilliant stuff, and thanks to you, Alice, and thanks also to the Pearly Queen. It's Welwyn Garden City. I have family living there. It's one of those crazy English words that looks different to how it is. Alice brought it there live for us in Trafalgar Square, covering those great celebrations for St George's Day. And indeed, from all of us here at GB News, a very happy St George's Day to you all. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We have plenty more still to come this afternoon, including we'll be going live to Paris to get the latest on the French elections. The public will cast their vote tomorrow, and the stakes remain pretty high. All of that to come. But first, let's get you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Bethany Elsey.
Thanks, Alistair. It's 12:33. I am Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is just the beginning and that Moscow has plans to invade other countries. Meanwhile, the governor of Luhansk says shelling in all Ukrainian-controlled cities in the eastern region is intensifying. UK military intelligence reports Russian forces have made no major gains in the last 24 hours, and heavy fighting continues in Mariupol, frustrating Russian attempts to capture the city. A Conservative MP has asked Durham Police to review its decision not to fine Sir Keir Starmer after footage appeared to show him drinking and socialising in April 2021 when indoor mixing was banned. Sir Keir was cleared of breaching any rules by Durham Constabulary in February, but Richard Holden believes the decision should be reviewed in the wake of Boris Johnson's party fine. UK supermarkets have placed limits on how much cooking oil people can buy due to supply chain problems caused by the war in Ukraine. Tesco has introduced a temporary buying limit of 3 cooking oils per customer, and Iceland is rationing sunflower oil sales to 1 bottle per person. The British Retail Consortium said the move was a temporary measure to ensure availability for everyone. And campaigning has ended in the French presidential elections ahead of polls opening tomorrow. Pollsters are predicting the race is very close, with incumbent President Emmanuel Macron expected to reach just over half of votes, between 55.5% and 57.5%. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. I'll get back to Alastair Stewart in just a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, welcome back. It's 23 minutes to 1, and you are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio. As we have said several times this morning, the French public do indeed go to the polls tomorrow to vote on who they want to be their next president for the next 5 years. Now, the latest opinion polls suggest that Emmanuel Macron is on track to win this presidential election and become the first sitting president to win a second term for 20 years against his very familiar contender, Marine Le Pen. Recently published surveys suggest that Macron's score is stable between 55 and 58%. But Le Pen's far-right party has never been this close to power, meaning the stakes genuinely remain very high. Joining me now is the best of the best. Laura Haim, who's a French journalist and global correspondent, but also worked 5 years ago on Emmanuel Macron's campaign when she was the top advisor on international affairs. Laura, thank you so much for finding time for us. Today really is a day of reflection, isn't it? And then, as they say, France then votes this time with its head rather than its heart. Do you think it is close to call?
Yes. I think it's close to call. And, in 2016 in the United States, all the polls were predicting Hillary Clinton. And in the middle of the night, we discovered in the United States that Donald Trump was going to be elected. This is a very volatile election. Emmanuel Macron, until the end, did a very good campaign. The debate was good for him. However, you have a lot of resentment, you have a lot of anger, you have a lot of people who are expressing polls after polls that they're fully disillusioned by the political parties. So I will say that I'm cautious. We have to be cautious and see what this democracy wants for the next 5 years. And as you said quite well, the far right and the Le Pen party is really high at this moment, close to 50%. So no matter what, there's a real division in the French society like never before.
Absolutely fascinating. I'll tell you the other thing that struck me, and while you were giving that answer, Laura, we're lucky enough to be joined by folk on radio as well as on television. We were running some pictures of the Le Pen rallying and also Macron. There's a lot of very young people turning out for Le Pen, and she's toned down some of the racist stuff and really bigged up the economy. Lower taxes for young people just starting out in working life. That struck me as having touched a chord.
Yeah, and that's the problem of the Macron campaign. You have a lot of young people who are saying we don't want to vote for him. We prefer to vote for the extremes. So the young vote is splitting between the far right, but also the far left, with someone who is really going to be really important in what I'm calling the third round, which is going to happen just after Sunday with a kind of a midterm election in June to decide which will control the parliament, the French parliament, and who will become the French prime minister. The far left is really important in the youth. For the youth, they're expressing again poll after poll that they don't like any of the candidates. And yes, you have a lot of young people showing in front of the camera for Marine Le Pen. But you have, I will say, a lot of French who want Marine Le Pen in power and who absolutely hate Emmanuel Macron. And what is really interesting for me is that, I live in the United States. I came back to cover this election as a journalist. And in 2017, I was working for Macron, and the vote at this time was against Marine Le Pen. At this time, coming back to France, I can really see that half of the French people are telling me we don't like him, we don't want him anymore. Yes, he might be very good for Europe. Yes, he has a lot of experience in the international issues, but there were many, many crises, and he's not close enough to us. So again, let's see what tomorrow will happen. Let's see how the voters will decide. I'm cautious, and no matter what, if tomorrow Emmanuel Macron wins, it needs to be a really big victory. Otherwise, I will predict that the country will remain very divided with a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, and Macron will have to compose very soon if he's elected with this anger.
Laura Haim, a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much indeed for those insights. That's Laura Haim, who, as she said, lives and works in the United States of America now, but has gone back to Paris to cover an election which, as she said, is pretty tight and significant whichever way it goes. Now, as the war in Ukraine continues, a humanitarian corridor has opened to get civilians out of Mariupol to be evacuated from what's already, to be brutally honest, a devastated area. Despite increased activity from Russia, UK intelligence sources suggest that they have made no major developments or advances in the last 24 hours. However, Russia claims a range of successes as its air force targeted multiple Ukrainian military facilities overnight. Now, the United Kingdom says it will now offer top-of-the-range tanks to Ukraine, but via Poland. They get the British tanks, so they can give their own tanks on to Ukraine. That may be considered a dangerous situation. To discuss that and so much more, I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by somebody who really will be able to answer all of my questions. It's a good friend of mine, the former Channel 4 News reporter and diplomatic editor and co-author of Thinking the Unthinkable, Nick Gowing. Straight first question. You said to me earlier, a leaked new Russian strategy, perhaps by accident, but all of Donbass and the entirety of the south.
Yes, what we've had is from a two-star Major General giving a briefing in which he talked about eventually Transdniester. Now, this is not a household word or name to most people. It's in the eastern part of Moldova where there are 1,500 Russian troops already, but talking about how coming down from Donbass, across through Mariupol, round through Odessa, Crimea.
Well, when you said that to me, what it reminded me of is something we discussed when you were last on, and that's Zelensky's own speech. If we, God forbid, fall in Ukraine, Moldova next, then Georgia, then the Baltics, etc., etc.
That's exactly where we're going.
Yeah.
I was last with you about a month ago. I would put to you that the situation in Ukraine is now even more gruesome, even more awful. We can worry about the humanitarian situation in Mariupol, but Putin is now determined to do what he set out to do, and he appears to be even more isolated, but even more determined. I was very struck. You're seeing, I think, the launch of a new missile.
We talked about that on the programme the other day. That's the Satan II multiple warhead
10 warheads.
Intercontinental ballistic missile.
At least the good thing is Putin did warn the Americans he was going to do it, unlike the North Koreans. So there was no threat there. But there were other images a couple of days ago of Putin with his Defense Secretary Shoigu, who was rumoured to have a serious heart attack, who looked diminished as a defence secretary, as a defence minister. The options opening up now for Putin are really very difficult. But what is emerging now is this approach to the NATO red line, I'd put to you, Alistair.
Yes.
That, sending probably 14 Challenger 2 tanks, which were surplus under the integrated review, which were going to be scrapped anyway, to Poland so that they can send their Soviet, Russian-built T-72 tanks into Ukraine, along with helicopters as well, is a useful let's call it an eliding of the situation. But I think it's pushing Putin close to intolerance of where things are going.
It's interesting, isn't it? Again, going back that month, when another thing that we talked about then was, and I think it was Washington, you said, had vetoed, when the Polish wanted to give their MiG-29, I think they are.
That's correct.
Fighter, bombers, jets to the Ukrainian Air Force, and Washington said, no, that crosses a line. That drags potentially NATO into it.
I think it's moving much closer. But I was very...
Who's losing a grip, Nick?
Sorry?
Who is losing grip here? Washington, London, NATO, Stoltenberg?
I don't think anyone's losing grip, but I think it's getting tighter. I think it's getting more tense. NATO now has to establish itself as determined to defend its land and its territory. It's every centimetre. And what is now being talked about in NATO is a deployment of up to 40,000 troops right around the rim of Ukraine, because it's very clear, and listening to Fiona Hill, the former National Security Advisor, on the radio this morning, she's an expert in Russia and the Soviet Union, making it very clear that there is only one thing that Putin understands, and it is strength.
Yes.
And NATO has not shown that up to now, but will have to do it.
Will Putin and Moscow make hay with reports, as we have in the newspapers today, that Germany, we know that already, has gone cold on what it will provide, but Germany and France actually sold Russia armaments not that long ago.
Correct. But what has happened in Berlin with the 100 billion which they committed of euros which they committed to, they've gone a bit wobbly on that. Yeah. But let me just go back to one thing which General Sir Richard Sheriff, who was the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe, he said a couple of days ago very clearly, as others have said to me privately, NATO has got to plant itself very clearly as determined to resist whatever Russia is prepared to do, whatever Putin is prepared to do.
But and Nick, did the reporter in you, not the defence analyst and diplomatic analyst, the old reporter in you, hearing Sheriff, someone of that rank and that authority formerly, saying that, did you think that means that NATO strategically has in effect given up on Ukraine and we know now what's going to happen next?
Far from it. It's got to assert itself even more. And Sheriff was actually saying the kind of thing I said to you a month ago when I was here, that Putin now has his eyes on other countries. Because remember, Sweden and Helsinki and Finland may, at the NATO summit at the end of June, be applying for membership. Everything that Putin wanted to stop is now happening. But what Sheriff is saying, which is exactly what a number of people have said to me privately, we've got to assert ourselves. We in the United Kingdom have to assert ourselves. We've got to be sure that we have adequate defence, that we are prepared for the misery of what Putin may be doing to escalate what he's determined to do.
Nick, will you come back at 1 o'clock? That's a rhetorical question, because you very kindly told me that you were in about 10 minutes' time, but also join in with Joanne and Joe, because I want to dig a little bit into what you've just said and one or two other bits of how this plays from the Prime Minister's domestic position, not only the UK's strategic position, but how it plays for him as well. But for the time being, grim observations, but from you, as always, accurate and thoughtful. Thank you very much indeed, Nick Gowing there. Now, as I said, we'll be talking in about 10-15 minutes about that with Nick and Joe and Joanne, because, frankly speaking, it hasn't been the best of weeks in office for the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, as my panel and I were discussing at the top of the show, with Partygate scandal still rumbling on. And I know you don't want that discussed in great detail. I promise I will not talk photographs or cakes or anything of that. I'm talking about the politics of it, because it does matter. It's about who's running the country that you live in and what options you have as voters come the day. There are suggestions in this morning's newspapers that the Prime Minister will be fined for yet another party that took place in May 2020. The question now is it the right time for Boris Johnson to go? A limited number of his own MPs think so, but not a huge nor overwhelming number. Or can he fight back and maintain that top job? As many of you have already made crystal clear to me on social media that is your view. Well, joining me now is a man who can shine truly expert light on all of that. It's a good friend of mine, Sir Anthony Selden, political biographer and author of the beautifully named The Impossible Office, The History of British Prime Ministers. Anthony, 3 days of heavy pounding, his own statement of apology on Partygate and fines, PMQs, then the reference to the Privileges Committee. I put it to you what I put to Joe and Joanne earlier. Labour is playing into Johnson's hands by sounding like a one-trick pony.
Perhaps. And can I just say, Alistair, that it's such a pleasure to get away from it. I'm up here in Stratford-on-Avon. It's Shakespeare's birthday as well as St George's Day today. And the magnificent Royal Shakespeare Company are putting on wonderful plays today and every day. So it's a relief to get away from the rather depressing story that's going on in Westminster. Whatever we think about Boris Johnson, it's not getting any better for him, and it's unlikely to get better. The question is, can he stay on, and what damage will he do to himself and to the Tory party by staying on for longer? So you have a Prime Minister who categorically does not want to go. I mean, this is a fighter of really, all Prime Ministers, Alistairs, are fighters. None of them want to go, be dragged out of Downing Street, though all of them are. But this one in particular is going to fight it. He does not want to go down in history as the man who was forced out of office because of Partygate. He wants to go down as the man who won the greatest landslide since Thatcher, who got Brexit done, who the man who took the country through the worst epidemic for 100 years and who has stood up to Vladimir Putin over the Ukraine and more. That's what he wants. And he knows that if he's forced out...
Let me butt in, Anthony, because people who are listening to our conversation on radio rather than television, people watching on television will have just seen the Prime Minister glad-handing Modi in India as well. He also wants to go down right now as the guy who built new trade arrangements, supported the economy post-Brexit and made a go of it. That's actually on the agenda as well, is it not?
Most definitely, Alistair. He does not just want to be the man who got Brexit done. He wants to be the man who made Brexit work and who showed all those sceptics who said that Brexit was going to damage Britain economically and politically and diplomatically. He wants to show them that they were completely wrong. So this trip to India is very much part of that. It's all about showing that post-Brexit, he believes that new trading, new diplomatic relationships are possible because Britain is no longer part of the EU. So this is living history. And you can imagine the frustration that he is feeling, which is very genuine. He wants this to be what the papers, what GBNews and other outlets are commenting about, rather than the story of what happened in Number 10.
It's intriguing, isn't it, that I know people I know that you read, because we've chatted about it before, but people like Fraser Nelson, the very erudite editor of The Spectator magazine, and also The Telegraph, and Johnson used to edit The Spectator and has written occasionally, as we all know, for The Telegraph. Both Nelson and The Telegraph leader today are saying if he holds his nerve and gets on with the job as he's trying to do, whether it's at home on the economy or India on the economy, he can survive.
They are saying that, though Fraser Nelson was quite guarded. He was saying that they don't, a lot of them don't particularly want him. They think that he is a damaged brand, but equally they want chaos and confusion even less. And that since Rishi Sunak's star has been in the decline, there is no clear leader. A lot of people, MPs, particularly the 2010 intake, do not like Liz Truss. So if the party does get rid of Boris Johnson, it could spell months and months of division about which candidate do they want, which policies do they want. Is it going to be a free market Thatcherite government, or is it going to be, as the Telegraph and Spectator and others want, is it going to be more of a Theresa May, David Cameron, Harold Macmillan centre party with big government spending, not least for levelling up? And it's hard to imagine levelling up without money being thrown at it. So it could be, Alistair, months and months of rancour, which of course will be exploited by Labour and could indeed make Labour's chance of winning the next general election much more possible. So that is the dilemma that the Tories have. They have a Prime Minister who is under attack, and further attacks are likely to be coming over Partygate, but is also giving strong leadership on the Ukraine and globally on the one hand. On the other hand, who can they possibly unite around? So
Absolutely.
It's going to be really, really fascinating. I mean, Boris Johnson has made politics. I speak as a former a school teacher, as you know, Alistair, and a former vice-chancellor. He has made politics and contemporary history quite extraordinarily interesting.
Absolutely. As my conversations with you always are for me, and I hope also for you, Anthony. We'll talk again. Let's book it right now, that I'd love to talk to you about Penny Mordaunt, Tom Tugendhat, Tobias Ellwood, the next generation, for whenever that change does take place. Great to see you, and thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's Anthony Silden, political biographer, author of The Impossible Office, The History of the British Prime Minister, and former, as he said, headmaster of Brighton College and Wellington College. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've lots more coming up on the programme this afternoon, including more reflections on Boris Johnson's situation and his chances of survival. We'll have the latest from Ukraine, as more civilians are now able to be evacuated through a humanitarian humanitarian corridor from Mariupol, and a little more live on the French presidential elections live from Paris. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather here at home.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking mostly fine with sun in the north, but cloudier with a few showers further south. Let's take a look at the details. A fair amount of cloud is likely across the southwest, so sunshine will be limited. 1 or 2 showers are expected across Cornwall and West Devon. The southeast of England looks mainly dry, although here too the sun will move in and out of the cloud, and there'll be a cooling easterly wind blowing. Heading west into Wales, and this is where we're likely to see most of the afternoon showers. 1 or 2 of them could be heavy. By contrast, the northwest of England can expect a fine afternoon with increasingly sunny skies. Elsewhere, although it will feel warm in the sun, there'll also be a cooling wind. Much of the northeast will be sunny, although patchy low cloud could affect North Sea coasts, and the onshore wind will make it feel chilly at times. The wind won't be as brisk across Scotland, and here lots of sunshine's likely. However, parts of the east coast and far north of the country will have low cloud and mist. A fine afternoon's on the cards across Northern Ireland. There'll be some cloud at times, although the sun will still pop through, lifting temperatures into the mid-teens. Sunshine will give way to clear spells in the evening. Southern England could see further showers with low cloud and mist further north, and that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. It is 1 minute past 1 if you've just joined us. Thank you very much indeed for doing so. If you've been with us since 12, even kinder of you. Thank you very much indeed. I am Alastair Stewart, and we're into the final hour of our programme today. I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio, and we've plenty more still to come. More on our top discussion on Boris Johnson's fight back to maintain his top job as the party scandals continue to emerge and trundle on. Plus, as the pressure mounts at home, he flew off to India to strike a trade deal. We'll be discussing all of that within this hour, plus much more. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the latest news. Here once again is Bethany Elsey.
Thanks, Alistair. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is just the beginning and that Moscow has plans to invade other countries. Journalist and chief editor at Ukraine World, Volodymyr Yermolenko, told GB News NATO countries should prepare for an attack.
I think the West should understand that this is a big second front, because Ukrainians are fighting on the ground. They are dying for their country, but also for Europe. And it's clear right now that if Ukraine falls, Russia will continue its expansion to the NATO countries.
Meanwhile, the governor of Luhansk says shelling in all Ukrainian-controlled cities in the eastern region is intensifying. UK military intelligence says Russian forces have made no major gains in the last 24 hours, and heavy fighting continues in Mariupol, frustrating Russian attempts to capture the city. New satellite images appear to show further mass graves east of the port city. Ukraine says thousands have died in Mariupol in nearly 2 months of shelling. In other news, a Conservative MP has asked Durham Police to review its decision not to fine Sir Keir Starmer. That's after footage appeared to show him drinking beer with colleagues in April 2021, when indoor mixing was banned. Sir Keir was cleared of any breaches by Durham Constabulary in February, but Richard Holden MP believes the decision should be reviewed in the wake of Boris Johnson's fixed penalty notice. UK supermarkets have placed limits on how much cooking oil people can buy due to supply chain problems caused by the war in Ukraine. Tesco is limiting each customer to a maximum of 3 bottles of cooking oils, and Iceland is rationing sunflower oil sales to 1 bottle per customer. Most of the UK's sunflower oil comes from Ukraine. The British Retail Consortium said the move was a temporary measure, and the price of oils and fats is almost a quarter more expensive than a year ago. Campaigning has ended in the French presidential elections ahead of polls opening tomorrow. Pollsters are predicting the race for presidency is very close, with Emmanuel Macron expected to reach just over half of votes. President Macron has admitted it feels like a failure for him that his rival Marine Le Pen is set to reach a higher turnout than in 2017. French journalist David Chazan told GB News Le Pen's plans to scrap income tax is appealing to young voters.
Marine Le Pen has economic policies that Emmanuel Macron says simply don't add up to economic sense. He says she'd bankrupt the country in next to no time. And she's effectively offered a huge bribe to the under 30s by telling them that she will scrap income tax for them. They won't pay a penny. And she also wants to make big cuts in VAT.
Scotland's Minister for Europe says changing the Northern Ireland Protocol is unthinkable. Neil Gray has written to the Foreign Secretary calling for urgent talks on reports ministers are planning legislation to allow the scrapping of the post-Brexit trading agreement with the EU. Yesterday, when the Prime Minister was asked whether the UK would suspend aspects of the protocol, he said he would not rule out taking further steps. Drugs for an overactive bladder could be made available over the counter for the first time. The government is calling on millions of women with the condition to take part in a consultation period. It could lead to the medicine Aquiet, used to treat women with milder symptoms, being reclassified so it can be bought at a pharmacy without a prescription. Safe standing areas in football has improved crowd safety. That's according to a government pilot scheme. It found the installation of rails led to more orderly goal celebrations and fan exits and made overcrowding easier to spot. Clubs have been required to have all-seated stadiums for 25 years after the Hillsborough disaster. And happy birthday, Prince Louis. Buckingham Palace has released 4 photos to mark the youngster's 4th birthday today. The pictures taken by his mother, the Duchess of Cambridge, show him playing barefoot in the Norfolk sand dunes. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Bethany, thanks very much indeed. I am Alastair Stewart. Until 2 o'clock, I'll be keeping you company, along with friends and friendly guests. Still to come, Joe Phillips, Joanne Nadler and Nick Gowing are still here with me in the studio to discuss the top stories of the day. Pressure continues to mount for our Prime Minister as his leadership faces more threats as he's braced for yet another Partygate fine. We'll be discussing that, plus his trip to India in an attempt to strike a trade deal. Also this hour, it is the day of rest before the people of France cast their vote tomorrow on who they want to be their next president. So far in the opinion polls, Monsieur Macron looks set to take the win, but Le Pen's far-right party has never been this close to power. One commentator told me a little earlier, you can't write anything off just yet. It will all be decided at the wire tomorrow. The stakes are that high. We'll get the latest from our own reporter, who's there as well. GB News is all about you, our viewers. Any burning questions or stories that you think we need to cover, however big or small they may appear, we genuinely want to hear them. To get your voice heard, email gbviews@gbnews.uk and do please put Alastair Stewart in the subject line. We are also on YouTube. Subscribe there to see programmes that we've done in the past or to keep up with what we're doing right now. The channel GB News. Quick recap of some of the main markers today. Russia's clarified its ambitions, albeit perhaps leaked from a senior general in Ukraine. Victory not only in the Donbass and the whole of the south, but as far west as those parts of Moldova that are already very user-friendly as far as Russia's concerned. The UK sets to offer top-of-the-range UK tanks to Ukraine, but via Poland. Nick Gowing, who's here with me again in the studio, was saying earlier in this programme that that is a high-risk strategy because we'll be seen within the Kremlin as NATO getting much more involved than it has in the past. Is it the right move from the British government or is it very dangerous? How dangerous could it be? We'll explore what all of that means with folk who know. Plus, we'll explore the precarious position that the Prime Minister finds himself in with two former top aides. They are here with me live in the studio as well, and that's Joanne Nadler, who used to work in Central Office, the headquarters, the high command of the Conservative Party, and Joe Phillips, who worked alongside Paddy Ashdown when he was, fair to say, one of the most successful leaders of the Lib Dem. We're also going to be joined by Professor Anthony Glees from Buckingham University, but we're just working on the wiring there. So as soon as he turns up, we'll invite him, or I will invite him to join in the conversation. I want to move it on a little bit to the degree to which, as Anthony Selden and I were discussing, the foreign affairs agenda, glad-handing Modi over trade in India, being Ukraine's best friend, how that can work. John Major inherited the tail end of a Gulf War and was out there in his John Major sweaters shaking hands with the troops and what have you, but was seen on reflection to have played a minor part rather well in the end.
I think that's right. I mean, I think, as you say, he inherited the situation and there does tend to be a sort of a bounce of approval for new leaders coming in. I think that, reflects well on the British public. People give new leaders the benefit of the doubt. And, he had a certain manner which was very conciliatory and diplomatic and, helpful in that situation.
Yeah. Do you think it can play strategically to say, I'm the Prime Minister, my back is against the wall domestically, but look at me on the world stage. I'm good at this stuff.
I think people can see through it, Alistair. I mean, I have to say, regarding John Major, I feel that he never, ever gets the credit that he deserves for laying the foundations for the Good Friday Agreement. And I know we were talking about Northern Ireland earlier. And it's always seen as Tony Blair's victory, but it was actually John Major that did so much of the hard graft on that. Yeah. And he really deserves it.
I'll tell you who else, while we're on that, and junkies will remember the name, because Margaret Thatcher famously said every Prime Minister needs a Willie.
Willie, absolutely.
Willie Whitelaw,
yeah.
Winchester College, old-school landowner,
yeah.
who persuaded Margaret Thatcher to start talking to the IRA.
Yeah, absolutely.
Extraordinary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that was going on for a long time before Tony Blair, got the plaudits, rightly, for actually getting the deal over the line. But I think You know, it's very tempting when things are a bit tough at home to go on the world stage. You know, Boris Johnson got a huge welcome in India. There were posters of him all over the place. That's not what he would have got necessarily if he'd walked
Nick
out.
Gowing has the honour, because I don't think any of us three were there, but of having been in Paris on the evening that Margaret Thatcher...
November 1990.
Yeah, didn't do as well as she'd hoped, nor as her parliamentary private secretary told her she had, perhaps, and it coined the great phrase on reflection, it's all over.
She was there for a big summit for the CSCE, for the security in Europe, with all the leaders of the world. And she was ambushed, essentially, by one issue, which was Peter Morrison, who was her private secretary, getting off a plane from London, rather drunk, and turning up at the embassy. I was in the forecourt with John Sargent and other journalists. And she went in and then got the news from London when there was the push from Heseltine and the cabinet turning against her. And she said, "We fight on, we fight to win." But what you got there was a sense of her and Charles Pole, her foreign policy advisor, who were single-minded about the change of what's happening in Europe. It was a year after the wall came down, etc. And therefore, this was a distraction. But this was all that mattered when it came to the public perception of what was going on. And she misread it. And reading Chris Heaton-Harris and others and what's been happening in the last 24, 36 hours about how he, as chief whip, was misreading the mood. It reminded me very much of what was happening in India. I've worked a lot in India.
I understand that.
Let me just make one other point. I think there's a danger of being overwhelmed by Narendra Modi and the Guard of Honour and so on. This happens to an enormous number of visitors to India. So be careful. The pictures almost give the wrong story. It was big for Boris, but actually the worst pictures were him being interviewed in Gujarat by several television correspondents and looking really uncomfortable in front of a temple.
Yeah, I would just say on that point that I think the television correspondents look pretty bad as well. I think the point that he made about needing...
I thought the cat's having 9 lives, how many lives have you got left, was just extraordinary.
Extraordinarily poor as a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite. That's my point.
Yeah. I was just agreeing with you. I'm allowed to do that. I don't have to disagree with all of my guests.
Absolutely. I mean, I suspect that the rest of the sofa might not agree with me on this.
Well, I'll ask you, because you were the one who said what Margaret was doing back in 79 when eventually she fell.
90.
Sorry, I beg your pardon, 90. I got really cross recently when our colleagues, now in office, not you and I who are doing other things, edited the pictures of Boris Johnson at the G7 to make it look as if he was cold-shouldered by everybody, when there were miles of images of him glad-handing Biden, tapping Macron on the back, and it being reciprocated. It is not the media's finest hour at the moment, Nick.
I wasn't in an edit room, so I don't know what decisions were taken.
But would you ever have done that?
I don't think so.
No, I don't either.
But you would if you were a stills photographer. I mean, you know, we've all spent, certainly Joanne and I have spent our lives ushering people away from signs that say exit or, you know, beach photographs with the tide going up. You know, think about Neil Kinnock.
Neil Kinnock falling over on the Brighton beach,
You're always going to use that opportunist...
Hang on a second, that's the other side of it. You're talking about when you're working for a political party where you have the job to present who you're working with in the best light.
These were people working for
media.
public service broadcast balance. Let me just butt in for a moment, because I've just been told in my ear that Professor Anthony Glees, we've been able to plug the wires into the right place, which is great. Anthony, can you hear me? No, he's not. There we are. Sorry, I interrupted. The distinction that I interrupted, which is a vital one, is between what people like you as a spin doctor do, and you're entitled to do whatever you like, as indeed are the newspapers that can be as partisan as they like, but public service broadcasters are not allowed to do what they did at G7.
Well, I mean, my point was that actually, because you know that people will be looking for that photograph or that shot, you try to avoid it where possible. There's a difference between cutting out and deliberately manipulating, but if that's the photograph, And if that had been a photograph on the front page of the Telegraph, we wouldn't be making.
OK, I'm going to move it on because I think we've all made our.
But I think he's got a
problem.
problem.
You stepped very quiet.
Yeah, because I wasn't in the edit room and I didn't know what decisions were taken, and therefore I don't want to.
But you know the point of principle that the rest of us are talking about.
But I think the other issue I'd just like to raise is he's talked about getting a deal with India by October. India works slowly, even under Narendra Modi. And I think...
Is it an alliteration too far? Deal by Diwali?
This has been under
I know, but
discussion for some time.
Exactly, by Diwali. I think that's a big, big ask. It could happen. It could be that Modi cracks a whip internally. He's threatened a lot of bureaucrats and said, if you don't do things, then I'll sack you. But I think it's a big commitment to make publicly in the way that he did.
Anthony Glees, Professor, University of Buckingham. The cabling has been really quite irritating. There, with a lovely smile, and Anthony joins us live. I'm sorry you couldn't come in earlier on because it was absolutely brilliant stuff from Nick Gowing, who I know you know, and Joanne Nadler and Joe Phillips as well, who have a bit of mileage with the Conservative Party and with the Liberal Democrats. My point, Anthony, was the degree to which a Prime Minister, however much his or her back is up against the wall, can embrace the international agenda, be it Ukraine or be it trade talks with Modi in India, to save his skin at home.
Well, I'm afraid to say I don't think it works in British politics, and perhaps it's just as well. People like me think of Winston Churchill in 1945, rallied the nation, helped the nation to defeat the Nazis and defeat the Italians and the Japanese. And what happens? The first election after the war in Europe ends and he's thrown out of office with a Labour landslide. And I also think of Tony Blair, not necessarily in the sense of the Iraq war and the weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist, that did for him, but that he strongly favoured what he called liberal wars of intervention in the former Yugoslavia, for example, to rescue the Muslim inhabitants from the Serb butchers there. Again, it didn't really help him very much because it was totally outweighed by those people, led of course by Jeremy Corbyn, who opposed the invasion of Iraq. I actually think the real problem for Boris Johnson now is that he is not trusted to tell the truth. And I think my feeling is British voters are putting that above all the things that he did in respect to the Ukraine, where he really did provide, in my opinion, the leadership that the rest of Europe so desperately needs and needed. It's a terrible thing, but the bottom line is most Brits are decent. They want their Prime Minister to tell them the truth, and he hasn't or appears not to have done so. And I think that will be fatal for him.
Sure. I'm not going to go down that road because we did a lot of it in the first part of the programme at 12 o'clock. I would merely observe that cephalogically it remains neck and neck, which between Starmer and Johnson, which in the current climate I find cephalogically or number crunching truly extraordinary. What I'm desperate to have your uninterrupted view on this, which the three of us discussed earlier, Joe and Joanne at the beginning of the programme, and Nick in great detail just about 20 minutes ago. The degree to which in Ukraine there is danger afoot, that the United Kingdom and other NATO members are saying we will supply things like Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine via Poland, i.e. we'll park them in Poland so Poland can send its old Warsaw Pact tanks into Ukraine to fight the good fight. That is going to go down like a Led Zeppelin in the Kremlin, says Nick Gowing.
Well, that may be true, but I think Nick would be wrong to worry too much about what the Kremlin are going to do. As you allow me to say to you previously, in a previous programme, Alistair, I do not believe Putin is suicidal. I don't think he's going to start a nuclear war because he knows he will be obliterated. He's a man who takes great care of his health, takes great, he sits people far away from him so he doesn't get any bugs from them. He's got vast amounts of money stored all over the West in trust funds and so on. So he's not going to commit suicide, even though I think he is demented. However, we are already involved in a war with Russia in Ukraine. Yes, it's being fought by proxy with the courage of the Ukrainians. And what we're now told is that the thinking is this war is going to go on for a very long time and be a war of attrition. That gives us the opportunity to continue to supply more arms. And I myself continue to think that we in the West should be escalating, not to save Boris Johnson's skin, because I don't think that will do it.
No, I got that. Nick Gowing to Anthony Gleeson.
Thank you for... Hi, Anthony. Nice to see you again. But you say I'm wrong to say that. What any planning has to be about the worst-case scenario. I'm thinking the unthinkable, which is actually thinking the unpalatable. Even if we don't believe it'll happen, it could be that if Putin is cornered increasingly and feels more and more desperate, and there's a big escalation here, he will see this as a provocation which takes him to a limit which he's not prepared to accept. And therefore, every calculation has to include a calculation of what will be his response, not necessarily tomorrow or the day after, but 2 or 3 weeks down the track. And what happens as well if there were to be a guidance system on a missile which ends up in Poland or ends up in Germany? They launched one missile from the Caspian Sea the other day.
Joe Phillips.
Well, I have to say I agree with Nick, and I think, we have been collectively turning a blind eye to what Putin's done. He plays a long game. He went into Crimea years ago. We didn't do anything. We went, oh, tut, 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 and turned the other cheek. So he can see what he can get away with. We heard President Obama say, red line, if you use chemical weapons in Syria. Nothing happened. Putin has been able to sit back and watch as nothing's happened. So he doesn't need to use nuclear weapons. He just needs to carry on doing what he's doing. And
Joanne Nadler.
Right.
Well, I think it's an interesting thing to consider the unintended consequences. That's the issue that
exactly
that politicians often aren't able to consider either in the short term or the longer term. We had a conversation, didn't we, about liberal interventionism from Tony Blair. It was because of misplaced liberal interventionism that he then wasn't able, or the UK government decided not to act after 2013. They had that vote in Parliament and Obama didn't go through with it. And partly as a result of that, we are where we are now.
Studio gang, we have to park it. I want to get back to Anthony just for a final, very quick thought, if you'd be so kind, Anthony, and that is this. Johnson, for the first time in quite some time, is now saying, don't ever forget that Russia can win this. That's quite a shift.
Well, that's a big problem for Johnson if he wants to gain support by backing a winner. If Ukraine doesn't win, he's in big trouble for that. But I continue to believe the right way to deal with Putin is to have a war of liberal intervention fought by Ukraine. And just compare for 1 second the things that our Prime Minister has been saying. And I'm not a Boris fan, but I was proud of what he did, and I'm proud of what he's saying, and proud of what he's doing, compared to, for example, the French president, who thinks the really important thing is to keep chatting to an appalling war criminal and mass murderer, and the German Chancellor, who dithers about and makes it appear that the most important thing for Germans is to avoid getting into trouble. The moment you say we will not fight a nuclear war under any circumstances, that is the moment that a thug like Putin wins. You must not do that. It is a deterrent. And the tougher we are, the more likely it is that Putin will be got rid of by his army generals.
Anthony, thank you very, very much indeed. Professor Anthony Gleeson there at Buckingham University, the brilliant Joanne Nadler and Joe Phillips here in the studio, and the ever-brilliant Nick Gowing as well. We could go on for half an hour, except we can't, because we've only got 25 minutes left and we've still got to do the news and the weather. But for the time being, lovely to see all of you again, and thank you so much for joining in what I hope for folk at home on television and radio was an interesting conversation. Thank you all very much indeed. We've plenty more still to come in that precious 25 minutes, 30 minutes or so that remains here on Alastair Stewart and Friends. After the break, we'll be going live across to France and joining up with our reporter Paul Hawkins, who's there to find out who the French really are likely to elect as their next leader. Is it a foregone conclusion? Or will Monsieur Macron have to have a fight still on his hands when the French make that crucial decision tomorrow? But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather here at home.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, in the UK is looking mostly fine and sunny in the north, but cloudier with a few showers further south. Let's take a look at the details. A fair amount of cloud is likely across the southwest, so sunshine will be limited, and 1 or 2 showers are also likely, especially across Cornwall and West Devon. The southeast looks mainly dry, although here too the sun will move in and out of the cloud, and there'll be a cooling easterly wind blowing. Heading west into Wales, and this is where we'll see most of the afternoon showers. 1 or 2 of them could also be heavy. The northwest of England can expect a fine afternoon with increasingly sunny skies as elsewhere. Although it will feel warm in the sun, there'll also be a cooling wind. Much of the northeast of England will also be sunny, although patchy low cloud could affect North Sea coasts, and the onshore wind will make it feel chilly at times. The wind won't be as brisk across Scotland, and here lots of sunshine is likely. However, parts of the east coast and far north of the country will have low cloud and mist. A fine afternoon is on the cards for Northern Ireland. There'll be some cloud at times, although the sun will still pop through, lifting temperatures into the mid-teens. Sunshine will give way to clear spells this evening. Southern England could see further showers with low cloud and mist further north. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Seconds away from precisely 1:30, and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. So, as I hope you are now clear, after the first hour and a half of this programme, the French public do indeed go to the polls tomorrow to vote on who they want to be their next president. Recently published surveys suggest that Emmanuel Macron's score is pretty stable between 55 and 58%. But Le Pen's far-right party has never been this close to power, meaning that the stakes, even in these last 24, 36 hours, remain very high. I'm delighted to say that our reporter Paul Hawkins is in France with the very latest, and he joins me live now. There he is. And I saw you earlier on GB News and listened to you on radio as well, chatting to ordinary folk, away from the commentators, away from the great newspaper editors. Just that mood that you're picking up there, Paul.
Yeah, Alistair, it's fascinating, frankly. We've chatted to a couple of women earlier. One of them told us that she's going to spoil her ballot, frankly, because she can't decide between Macron or Le Pen. She doesn't really want to vote for either. She'd watch Macron in the televised debate in the middle of the week, and she felt that after listening to his economic policies and after hearing what he had to say, that he was simply too capitalist, too right-wing for her. So she's not going to vote for him. And then obviously, since that turned her off, she was never going to vote for Marine Le Pen either, who is seen by many as the far-right candidate in this election. We spoke to another lady who said, I'm reluctantly going to vote for Macron. I don't really want to. I did in the first round, I'm going to in the second round, but I don't want to vote for Marine Le Pen. Now, the reason I don't want to, that I'm happy with Emmanuel Macron is that he is now seen as part of the establishment. 5 years ago, France's youngest ever president, new party, new boy in politics, very little political experience. He was seen as the outsider, and a lot of people were galvanised to vote for him because he didn't come from France's two main parties, the Republicans and the Socialists. Fast forward 5 years, we've had first term of a Macron presidency in which he has enacted policies that have been right-wing. He's liberally liberally socially left, but on the right wing, he's very pro-business. He, for example, to give you an example, one of his policies is that he wants to increase the retirement age to 65 from 62. Very controversial in France. So it's alienated a lot of left-wing voters, which is why you get the views that I mentioned that we did earlier. Marine Le Pen, she comes from what many deem as the far right. She is controversial because she wants to enact policies such as banning Muslim women from wearing the hijab in public, and also bringing in a policy called Priorité Nationale, which would effectively mean that those of French nationality get priority when it comes to housing or welfare or jobs. So, you know, it's a big choice for French people to make. A lot of people say that they might even stay away from the polls. Voter turnout could be low. That could play into Le Pen's hands. So it'll be fascinating to see what the voter turnout is when the polls close at 8 a.m. tomorrow night. 8 p.m. tomorrow night. That's when we get a snap poll, and we should have some idea whether Marine Le Pen has been voted in. It's possible but not probable, or whether more likely Emmanuel Macron gets a second term, and if so, he become the first president to be re-elected for 20 years.
We shall be watching with great interest, and you will be there for us. Paul Hawkins, thank you very much indeed. Paul Hawkins there live for GB News TV and radio in France. And as I say, he will be there tomorrow as well with all of the important details of that exit poll, as they don't call it, but I just thought I'd say that. 33 minutes past 1, 27 minutes to 2. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've plenty more still to come in that final half hour, including following our trip to the French polls, we'll be travelling back across the channel to bring you the latest from Downing Street and the Prime Minister's trip to India. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the latest news headlines. Here's Bethany Elsey.
Thanks, Alistair. Good afternoon. It's 1:35. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Russia has resumed its attack on the last Ukrainian defenders holed up in a giant steelworks in Mariupol, hitting it with airstrikes and trying to storm it. Ukrainian authorities say more than 1,000 civilians are there with the troops. The city is seen as crucial to Russia as it can link the eastern Donbass region with Crimea, the Black Sea Peninsula that Moscow seized in 2014. A Conservative MP has asked Durham Police to review its decision not to fine Sir Keir Starmer after footage appeared to show him drinking and socialising in April 2021 when indoor mixing was banned. Sir Keir was cleared of any breaches by Durham Constabulary in February, but Richard Holden believes the decision should be reviewed in the wake of Boris Johnson's fixed penalty notice. UK supermarkets have placed limits on how much cooking oil people can buy due to supply chain problems caused by the war in Ukraine. Tesco has introduced a temporary buying limit of 3 cooking oils per customer, and Iceland is rationing sunflower oil sales to 1 bottle per customer. The British Retail Consortium said the move was a temporary measure to ensure availability for everyone. And a 33-year-old man has been arrested after a man was stabbed and 10 others were injured in an attack in a Coventry town centre. Warwickshire police say the suspect remains in custody following the incident in Bedworth this morning. A man in his 20s is in stable condition in hospital, and detectives are appealing for anyone else who was injured to come forward. Campaigning has ended in the French presidential elections ahead of polls opening tomorrow. Pollsters are predicting the race is very close, with incumbent President Emmanuel Macron expected to reach over just half of votes. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. It's back to Alastair Stewart and friends in just a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 22 minutes to 2, and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News. Now, we have been speaking about Boris Johnson's premiership today with a range of guests and political commentators, with the upcoming Sue Gray report and Partygate still in the papers. Does it take the shine off the Prime Minister's trip to India this week? I wanted to speak with his former colleagues to get the inside track on what Boris Johnson will be considering as his next move on the back of that important visit to India. And in a moment, I'm delighted to be talking to Sunil Sharma, who's a bit of an expert on these matters, and he's with me in the studio. But first, the gentleman that you are seeing side by side is an old friend of mine, Kulveer Ranger, who's the former Transport and Digital Advisor to Boris Johnson when the Prime Minister was Mayor of London. It's always a pleasure to see you, Kulveer. How collegiate is Boris Johnson when his back is against the wall? Is it bunker mentality or banter mentality?
Well, great to join you again, Alistair, on your show. And hello, good afternoon to your viewers. It's not bunker. It's definitely never bunker with Boris. Boris is one of those people, as you know, I've known him for a very long time, worked 4 years cheek by jowl with him in City Hall. It's always a moving forward policy. More to be done, focus on the challenges ahead, keep delivering. He will be driving that message home about delivering. And what do I mean by delivering? It's all the promises that he is making, and he makes a lot of promises. And someone who was responsible for delivering some of those promises, I know what it feels like, the pressure, because he knows that actually when it comes down to it, people will judge him on his delivery. Yes, they might not be happy with some of the things he's done, some of the things he said. And yes, I know the issues about parties are running, and people quite rightly are upset. But at the end of the day, if he delivers those hospitals, those homes, the jobs, the challenge that we have on the cost of living crisis, and this radical agenda to level up the economy of the country and the opportunities in the UK, I think people will take a long look at his record and say, well, you know, he does what he promises to do. And I think that's why he's been so successful as a politician all these years.
Fascinating. Given that list of alternative challenges that you talked about, and we were talking about it on the programme earlier with Joanne Nadler, who you know, who's a Tory consultant, but also Joe Phillips, who's a Lib Dem consultant, I asked them, and I'll ask you directly as well, given that that's what folk are more worried about, particularly cost of living and energy prices, was it that wise of him to troop off to India and try and cut a trade deal that is still going to take quite some time to start delivering wealth and jobs and the rest of it here? Would you advise him to go on that trip or stay and fight the good fight here at home?
No, absolutely, because, you know, you're Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and you are taking this country forward on the global stage, and particularly after Brexit. We are now in a position to make these deals. And India is a long-term relationship partner, a huge business partner. It's going to be the third biggest economy in the world by 2050 and have population greater than the US and the EU combined. This is a huge market for global Britain. And this Prime Minister wants to ensure that we're at the front of that queue. We're making that relationship to get a trade deal in place. And I think the agreement that's been reached with Prime Minister Modi has been to get an agreement done by autumn of this year. Now, that would be absolutely brilliant for British economy, for British jobs, for British trade, import and exports. And I think that's the kind of focus that he has. Yes, there's problems at home at the moment, current issues, but if you get bogged down with only those, which what the opposition and the people who are challenging the Prime Minister probably do want to time up with, you won't get this kind of progress of Britain on the global stage and bringing the jobs and the opportunities to the country that the Prime Minister wants to see happen here.
Interestingly, just while you were saying that, we're looking at some great pictures from India and the importance of imagery, as it were. I hate the word optics, but what the guy's looking like out there on the job, it applies to all politicians, whatever one's persuasion is. How important is it to you, looking at it objectively, but having been there and done it, that someone like Gito Hari, a very good friend of mine going way, way back, is back in there now? Because the Prime Minister, interestingly, said in the House of Commons in the debate when he apologised again on Tuesday that he's tried to sort out number 10, he's tried to get the right people in there. Gito Hari seems, to me at least, to be a very safe pair of hands.
He's not only a safe pair of hands, and he's a dear friend of mine. I've known him a long time, and I very much encouraged him to go back into number 10 when he was asked. I've always been saying he's the kind of person that the Prime Minister can rely on. Their contemporaries. Gito can speak honestly and openly to the Prime Minister. He's given him great advice over the years. They've not always shared the same perspective on certain topics. Like friends of Boris, we don't always have the same perspective, but what we do have is the same passion to get the right results done and to support the Prime Minister in achieving the huge challenges that he has to take on. So that's why I'm absolutely ecstatic that Gito Hari is in number 10, and also the machinery around number 10 is being much better organised. And Gito brings a vast amount of experience to do that, both from a media perspective, a political perspective, and from his time in City Hall.
Sure. Final point to you, and Sir Anthony Seldon, who I've known for years and admired and has written some of the best political biographies in the business, as well as a kind of textbook on what a ghastly and difficult job being Prime Minister is. He said about an hour ago on this programme, knowing Boris Johnson as I do, said Seldon, he won't want to go out with his back up against the wall. He'll want to go out as the guy who did Brexit, won the biggest Tory majority in ages, won City Hall not once but twice against the odds. Seldon was suggesting he may wake up one morning, look at his watch and think, you know, I've had enough.
That's not what Boris Johnson is about. And to be honest, with all due respect to Anthony Seldon, all prime ministers are constantly thinking about their legacy. But the difference I would suggest humbly, as someone who's known Boris for a very long time, is Boris Johnson's appetite to get more and more done. It's relentless. It is, you know, many times people have said that Boris Johnson is a unique politician in terms of how he approaches things, his personal style, whether it's his hair, whether it's how he uses language, but also his capacity to take on challenges. And I think that is something that will mean that he'll continue to look at new challenges. This is the top job. This is the most privileged job in British politics. It's a stage that helps you set and change the country as well as help millions and millions of lives. This Prime Minister has a huge appetite to do more, and I don't see him waking up one morning and saying, I'm done. He'll want to keep doing more. And as long as he keeps delivering, and yes, there are challenges along the way, every Prime Minister has them, I think the electorate will look at him and say, do we think he's going to keep delivering the promises that he's made? And that's what he's got to do. He's got to keep the machinery of government delivering for him.
Culver, thank you so much for that analysis, coming from the basis of your experience and your background and knowing how the players perform. Great to see you, and thank you very much indeed, Culver Ranger, former Transport and Digital Advisor to Boris Johnson when the Prime Minister was Mayor of London. Sitting next to me, I'm delighted to say, my final guest, Sunhil Sharma. Sunhil's the Chief Operating Officer of Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth, and I bumped into him televisually 2 or 3 days ago when you were kind enough to join us on the Colin Brazier show, which I was doing while Colin had a little bit of time off, to talk specifically about the significance of that trip to India and the wisdom of doing it when things were going trickily at home. I think it was Culver who just said, India's the 3rd biggest economy in the world, and we need to be in there, we need to be on top of it. But it's going to take a little bit longer, perhaps, than December to bank it. What's your view?
I'd agree with that. I think it will take a while. India and UK, we discussed it on Thursday. Obviously, it's a very complex relationship, colonially, and what's happened in the last 50 years. I think the bigger issue for India is the lack of trust and how I think sometimes they perceive the West as fairly unreliable when it comes to partnerships. Regularly with China and Pakistan in particular, we have sided with them as Brits. We typically have backed them when they've been engaged with conflicts with India.
Give me just a little bit longer on that, because we touched on it last time, and I've read a lot more about it since we first had this conversation. And the United Nations votes and the situation in Ukraine is obviously the peg upon which to hang it. But the relationship between the United Kingdom and Pakistan, and the United Kingdom and India and Pakistan with Russia and China, it's incredibly complex, but it's vital to world peace.
Well, it's incredibly complex and something that needs quite a lot of time to really understand. You know, throughout history, India's closest ally has been Russia and the Soviet Union. They've supported them when they went into conflict with China in the 60s and 70s. It was Russia who was the partner in India, not the West. So there is a historic relationship that those two countries have. I'm sure if you spoke to Modi and a lot of Indians, they'll be very concerned, and they'd be, saying probably not so good things about Putin right now. And I'm sure that they are looking for alternatives.
Well, did it surprise you that Modi said to Johnson, because Johnson, it said, played down the Ukraine and the UN votes a little bit because the trade deal was the most important thing on the agenda that day. But Modi said to Johnson, I have spoken to Putin. I've said to Putin, what do you think you're doing? Is that credible?
I think that has surprised me a little bit.
Yeah, me too.
But I think it's good that he's done that. It definitely has surprised me because India, its military is largely the equipment that they've got. It's come from Russia. It's its biggest military partner, and it has been since its independence. So that did surprise me. It's definitely a step in the right direction. I think you look at India, you look at the way the country is, its history, its values, it's being a democratic country. It should be closer with the West. And that's, I think, where Boris and I think the States, and especially when Trump came, there was a real change and shift where they decided that they did want India on board. Naturally, that causes, I think, issues with India's neighbouring country in Pakistan. One of the biggest countries we give aid to is Pakistan. So I think I think you have to be a bit realistic about the relationship between the two countries. It's going to take a considerable amount of time. I think these two, and Boris and Modi, have made tremendous steps in probably, repairing a relationship that has been disjointed for some time.
We've got a couple of minutes left, so forgive me. I'm shifted away a little bit from India, partly because we talked about it last time, and you've been brilliant and erudite this time. When Anthony Seldon said Johnson will want to leave at the peak with his moment of history, having done Brexit and the rest of it, something else struck me the other day when the Duke and Duchess of Wessex ran into difficulty with Grenada, and we know that the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge had similar problems when they were in the Caribbean as well. Is it pushing it to say that Johnson wants to complete the work that is so important to you, and that is the conservative view of what the United Kingdom's relationship can be with the new Commonwealth and the old Commonwealth now in the 21st century?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's something that, you know, I speak to even a lot of Americans about it. It's such a thing that's been underused. We're so lucky to have, you know, 50 countries that have a shared history, shared beliefs. And I think the thing that you always have to say in 2022 is each Commonwealth country has chosen to be in the Commonwealth.
Yes.
And if they don't want to be, they can leave.
And to be fair, as William said, and are equally free to leave it.
Yeah.
But the thing that struck me, an amateur historian, is that a really vital process was begun with Harold Macmillan, another Conservative Prime Minister, when he talked about the winds of change running through the Commonwealth, running through Africa, and a new world order back in the 60s. Johnson's trying to have a bit of that.
I don't think New World Order. I think it's just being practical and pragmatic. Look at what's going on across the world right now. Russia, China. These countries have a different way of thinking, a different way of politics, a different way of governance. You have 50 countries or so that have the same philosophy as us, have the same general history, have the same beliefs. A lot of them are actually fastly growing now. You look at India's economy is growing you know, so much. And you look at Canada, Australia, New Zealand in particular, countries that speak the same language as us.
Yes.
It just makes practical sense to have close relationships, especially as we're Brexit, we're leaving the European Union. It makes sense to have a relationship with countries.
Final point, and it's brutally political. This is going to play very well amongst, as it were, the Indian diaspora, those folk who began their lives in India or whose dads and granddads and what have you, to see Johnson doing this with Modi. Is that a universal approval, or are there divisions within the Indian community in the United Kingdom?
I think largely, for sure, they will be approving this and they'll be happy to see him there. For sure, in India's, I think British Indians often felt like that's some of the issues that people say towards India when we talk about colonialism is something that most of them don't really care about. It tends to be people sort of city, in and around London, sort of upper to middle class.
Yes.
Most people don't really care about that. So I think they'll be overwhelmingly happy to see that he's actually acknowledging India, made the effort to go there, made the effort to do some of the cultural things that he's doing there. So I think overall, with the Indian diaspora, they'll be happy to see him there.
It's great to see you again, and thank you very much indeed. Twice in 1 week, a real pleasure, and so educational for me as well. Thank you very much indeed. That was Sunil Sharma, Chief Operating Officer at the Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth. We asked you 2 hours ago for emails, and you have inundated us, as you always do these days, which is lovely. Richard Brooks tweets, "I can't bear any more. I'm switching off all news programmes. I've heard barely anything about his visit to India." Sorry, with respect. We just did 5 minutes on it, and my panel talked about it as well. The media are obsessed with parties. No, we're not. We're obsessed with the backdrop to it and what's really going on in politics. I hope we've satisfied you and calmed you down a little bit, Richard, but thank you very much indeed for watching. Beachcomber tweets, great name. "We're so bored with all of it, the mainstream media have sucked the life out of the issue and turned it into resentment." Alan comes to us via email. "Partygate's a political farce stirred up by those who simply hate Boris. My sister died during the pandemic from COVID. We couldn't go to the funeral, but I don't blame Boris and the government, rightly or wrongly. They were doing their best to protect people." Marianne joins in the conversation via email as well. "This so-called Partygate has never been hidden. It was reported in the newspapers. If Boris had broken lockdown rules willfully, then why wasn't this raised at the time of that report? It's all being done with a completely political agenda." Barbara, "When will the people in the middle-class bubble realise that Starmer doesn't fool working-class people? He is a lawyer and sadly acts like one in the House of Commons. His lack of humour, no sense of irony and deviousness is completely unappealing." I'm going to object to deviousness. You're entitled, Barbara, to say whatever you want to say, but I think devious crosses the line. Starmer does what he does. Judge him as a character and as a performer, but I think devious is, as I say, I think that crosses the line. It's completely appealing, you say. "I'm a working-class woman and would never vote Labour or Lib Dem in any election, as I am not a hypocrite." I think, have we got time for a couple more? We have. That's good. Pam on email. Leave Boris to do a great job with the support of his backbenchers. I do not believe that Boris thought he was breaking the rules with Partygate, so let Boris get on with the fantastic job. And finally, because I do care passionately about balance, Chris joins the conversation to say, seems obvious to me that they should all quit if they broke the rules, as they have no morals, so therefore shouldn't be representing us in any way. You live by the sword. Well, there you go, Chris. Thank you for that, and for all of you. Tomorrow, as Joe Phillips was kind enough to blurt out, we do have Penny Mordaunt live on the programme, back from the United States of America, and we'll be talking about trade deals with her and her vision of the United Kingdom. If you've got time, read her brilliant book, Greater. I'll be back tomorrow with her and other terrific guests at 12 o'clock. Penny is the Minister of Trade and will be joining me here on the sofa. From all of us here, a very good afternoon to you and have a great day.
Looking ahead to this afternoon in the UK, it is looking mostly fine and sunny in the north, but cloudier with a few showers further south. Let's take a look at the details. A fair amount of cloud is likely across the southwest, so sunshine will be limited, and 1 or 2 showers are also likely, especially across Cornwall and West Devon. The southeast looks mainly dry, although here too the sun will move in and out of the cloud, and there'll be a cooling easterly wind blowing. Heading west into Wales, and this is where we'll see most of the afternoon showers. 1 or 2 of them could also be heavy. The northwest of England can expect a fine afternoon with increasingly sunny skies. As elsewhere, although it will feel warm in the sun, there'll also be a cooling wind. Much of the northeast of England will also be sunny, although patchy low cloud could affect North Sea coasts, and the onshore wind will make it feel chilly at times. The wind won't be as brisk across Scotland, and here lots of sunshine is likely. However, parts of the east coast and far north of the country will have low cloud and mist. A fine afternoon is on the cards for Northern Ireland. There'll be some cloud at times, although the sun will still pop through, lifting temperatures into the mid-teens. Sunshine will give way to clear spells this evening. Southern England could see further showers with low cloud and mist further north. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable, and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in.